Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a very special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
That the story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew, as always, that's everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, is given away by the title. I'm here to talk of the stories of film, and I tend to talk about development stories, production stories, marketing stories, release stories, all the ingredients, really, that go towards making the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. The films I tend to cover on this podcast, they lean more towards the mainstream than anything else. They're films I'm interested in or invested in to some degree. I try not to do snark. I try not to punch down. This podcast is a celebration of cinema and a real appreciation that somehow, films manage to get made. What you've happened upon here is one of my occasional special episodes of the podcast where I bring in a filmmaker to talk about their body of work or their latest release, in which case, in this particular case, a bit of both. The conversation is going to be centred primarily on the animated movie The Wild Robot, which has, at the point this is being recorded, already hit big in America. A sequel has already been confirmed as well. But it is written and directed, the adaptation is written and the film is directed by Chris Sanders. Now, Chris Sanders has previously co-directed How to Train Your Dragon with Dean DeBlois. That's going to come up in the conversation. Is the creator of Stitch, of Lilo and Stitch fame, and also, a few other bits and bobs in the midst of this as well. He has his own comic series, Kiskaloo. That's going to come up during the conversation you're about to hear. Also, it's primarily centered on the Wild Robot, and so the name Lupita is dropped in. That's Lupita Nyong'o, who is the lead voice in the film. I drop in a very brief mention of Jim Capabianco as well. That's with reference to an animated film called The Inventor that Jim Capabianco basically crowdfunded into existence. I think that's all you need to know going into this, though. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up with a clip from the Wild Robot trailer. The Wild Robot is heading into cinemas on the day this podcast is released in the UK. And then the other side of this, you'll hear my conversation with Chris Sanders. So that was a clip from The Wild Robot, the latest film from multiple Oscar nominee, I can say that, and the writer and director of The Wild Robot, Chris Sanders, who's joining me in front of lots of pretty pictures today. Hello, Chris Sanders. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you very much. How do we find you? You seem to be in a production office which looks really too tidy to be convincing and not staged.
It's I never really moved in. This is my office. I can say I never I never 100% moved in. I still have boxes on the floor, and it doesn't have enough personality, I'll say that.
Oh, well, it's the artifice of Hollywood I'm looking at right here. That's like, I should say right from the start that every parent listen. Let's get this out of the way. Every parent listening to this wants to invoice you. My daughter has bought all of Stitch memorabilia, and as far as I'm concerned, as the creator of that character, that is entirely your fault. And so there is underlying animosity throughout this conversation. You personally have cost me money.
Do it costs me money all the time. I just bought some other stuff this week. Yeah.
Hang on, whoa! You have to pay for your own Stitch merchandise.
Well, there's so much of it.
There is. I have noticed that too.
Right?
Can I go just temporarily right back to the start of your career before I come to the Wild Robot? Because I'm fascinated by the fact I didn't know this about you, having followed your films for an awful long time. I didn't know you started at the Jim Henson Company.
Yeah, that was my very first job. Yeah.
And I've always been a Muppet nerd, and I've always been fascinated externally by the culture and the warmth of the work that the Jim Henson Company put out. What was it like going in there just as presumably a very early job in your career? Were they all monsters, really?
It was my very first job.
Was it really?
It was my very first job right out of CalArts. I worked in the what they call the model department.
Yeah.
And which means anything that appeared in that particular episode, I would draw from many different angles so that it could be painted and sent overseas to keep everything on model. So there was a lot of just drawing that I would do as a discipline every day.
So your first job was drawing Muppets.
It really was, yeah.
Why did you quit? Why did you move on from that? That's career high, isn't it?
The show ended. I actually was laid off. It was my first layoff after about 3 years.
I'm sorry for bringing up such happy memories after all that.
Oh no,
an unfortunate avenue did. I'm fascinated by early films because and the reason for this is I spoke to Jennifer Yu Nelson after she'd made, I think it was the second Kung Fu Panda film, and she talked about one of her early jobs was at a small Canadian animation company, I think it was, and because it was small and because there wasn't much money, she learned everything. They weren't the best films she made, but she was doing all sorts of things on lots of those jobs. And I looked down your CV. It's just like I bought the Tarzan Activity Center CD-ROM you provided a voice for instance, but also things like Garfield, His 9 Lives, which the internet tells me is your feature debut as well. I'm just wondering, how important are those early jobs just to kind of not so much hone your craft, but learning to find your place in film and TV?
I mean, you really took the words right out of my mouth. I think that through doing these different things, not only do you always work with other artists, which means people who you are impressed by and that you can learn from. I learned something from every project I worked on. I learned something from the artists that were right next to me. I became a better draftsman, a better storyteller. And so you get these wonderful gifts along the way when you take these journeys. And as you move from project to project, you just become, I think, not only a better artist and perhaps a better writer and storyteller, but you also, like you said, you're starting to figure out where you belong. And I realized that I love animation, but I'm probably not the best animator. I think I'm a better story person. So I gravitated towards story and ended up in the story department at Disney Studios, where I worked with the best story artists and storytellers, I think, in the business. Joe Ranft, Ed Gombert, Brenda Chapman, all these amazing storytellers, and learned the craft of story. And what I realized later, when I began directing and writing, everything still comes back to story. Dean Deblois and I, when we became directors on Lilo and Stitch, we were momentarily, I think, worried because we didn't know how to do layouts. We didn't know how to do cleanup. We didn't know how to animate. I had learned animation, but I was really not that great at it. And then we realized we could do it if we stayed in our lane, meaning we stay in story. So when
Yeah.
we, and I, to this day, if I talk to an actor like Lupita,
Yeah.
I'm talking to her from from a story standpoint. I never ever tell her how to do anything. That's her art. I'll talk about what the story needs.
Yeah.
And that's true for when I interact with animation or when I interact with layout or camera. It's all about what the story needs and what the moment needs. And I let people do their thing. I let
Yeah.
them, they are the artists, they're the engineers, and I let them do their art, if you will.
Yeah. But conversely, I had the great fortune to have a long chat with Nick Park earlier this year, which to me is like talking to One Direction or something. I mean, that's just like just got. But he talked about how on his last film as director, Early Man, he sort of missed being on the floor. That he directed, I mean, every other film he directed, he was able to get his hands a lot dirtier. And then in the case of Early Man, as a sole director of an animated film for the first time, he found that he was removed a little bit. He didn't hate it or anything. I think it's more an observation. He was removed a little bit from what he'd fallen in love with in the first place. There is a parallel here to a degree with you. I know it's not the first time you've directed solo, but it's the first time you've directed animation solo. How conscious were you of that?
Very conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the thing I connect with animation through my drawings a lot of the
Yes.
time. And I think my on the floor thing would be story and
Yeah.
storyboarding, literally doing the storyboards. And I only had limited time to storyboard on this film. Most of my storyboarding I did in editorial. I just put
Yeah.
a story pad like on my lap. And rather than doing things digitally, here, I have one right here. I would just draw on my story pad in
Yeah.
editorial, and they would take the drawings and they would digitize them. So I still did my thing, if you will, storyboarding, but I just did it a little bit differently on this film. To me, it's the most critical element that I stay connected with. I can
Understood. Yeah.
Sometimes I can only see moments if I draw them first, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it's notable the fact that you're in front of a pad, even as we're talking here. You almost look like you're itching to draw. That's kind of like your happy place, which is great. I mean, coming to the wild robot, I should point out, I looked this up on the authority that is Wikipedia, and Wikipedia lists the wild robot, and I'll ask you to set it up in a minute for me if that's okay, as one of only 11 animated films about geese in cinema history, which is the most bizarre categorization. I did look into it. You're in the company. Well, quite. I mean, I wouldn't class your film as a geese film, but I just thought I'd tell you that does put you in the company of Gene Kelly, of all people. So you and Gene Kelly are cinematic masters of animated geese.
Oh my gosh. So you're talking about live action and everything. So that would include like a movie like Fly Away Home.
Doesn't count. No, it has to have a bit of animation in it. I didn't
Oh,
realize
animated
this.
movie. Okay, I get it.
Gene Kelly did a live action animated hybrid in 1967, which I've only found out about 10 minutes ago, called Jack and the Beanstalk. So you and him.
Gosh, I remember that. Oh my gosh.
I bet
It just
everyone
blew
asks
my
this
mind.
question.
I hadn't thought about that for a million years.
I had
I
no
love
idea he'd done it.
seeing that. Oh my God.
So
Oh my God.
now I've put you in the same company as Gene Kelly. Can you set the wild robot up for us, for people coming to this completely cold? I mean, personally, I was vaguely aware of the book, but I'm also conscious at the best of times, if it's a live action film, a director's making a decision to commit to something that's 2 years of their life, if it's going well. In animation, you're giving away everything forevermore. So if you can set that up and how you came into it and why you came into it.
Yeah, I was looking for another project after I finished my last project. I was just looking for my next gig, and I
Yeah.
dropped into DreamWorks, and I was looking through. They were showing me all the different things in development, and they showed me this book called The Wild Robot, and it's this wonderful story about a piece of high technology, a robot, a super advanced robot that wakes up on the shore of an uninhabited island and has no idea why it's there.
Yeah.
It is obviously lost, but doesn't know it yet. So Rosm 7134, or Roz for short, she simply makes her way inland looking for whoever bought her and looking for a task, because that's what a Rosm robot does. A Rosm robot accomplishes tasks.
Yeah.
Um, And that's the start of the story. So it's a tale about this robot that is looking for a job, can't find one, and instead of finding people, only finds animals. So because she is so advanced, she actually spends enough time to unlock the animal language and be able
Yeah.
to. Now she can converse with them, and really doesn't get any further. They still run from her and and want her not to be there. And one of them, a giant grizzly bear, while it's chasing her, she quite accidentally literally runs across a goose's nest, destroying it. And the only thing that is left intact is a single gosling egg.
Yeah.
And she decides she takes that task on all by herself and decides that is her first task. She's going to raise the gosling inside that egg to adulthood. And that's where the magic of this movie really kicks in. Because in order to accomplish this goal, Roz is going to have to exceed her programming. She's going to have to become more than she was programmed to be in order to
Mm.
survive on this island and to accomplish this mission. And that is something that we can all relate to. And being thrown into situations and being a bit, I think, challenged to
Yeah.
accomplish whatever it is we need to accomplish, and having to grow as a person or as a character. Um, Peter Brown, the author, revealed something very early on in our very first conversation. And it's something that he never memorialized in the book. And that was he believed that kindness could be a survival skill.
Yeah.
And so, as a screenwriter, I was able to memorialize that and actually put that up on screen. And that's one of the most powerful, I think, driving forces inside this movie is this wonderful robotic character that is unrelentingly kind and
Yeah.
good and begins to change the culture of the island around her. Um, Anyway, so that's our story. Our story is about a robot lost in on an uninhabited island and having to exceed her programming to survive.
And
And
what then is the eureka moment that makes you think I'm going to commit 5,000 hours of my life to it?
there were so many moments in the
Yeah.
story that I connected with. As I was reading it for the first time, I kept seeing these moments. And by the end of my first read, I was desperate.
Yeah.
I called Margie and I got back I got back in the office here as quickly as I could. And I was like, please, I want this to be my next film.
Yeah.
I can see it in my head. I need this to be my next film. I was desperate that all these things I felt and that all these things I saw wouldn't make it to the screen if I didn't get attached to it as soon as possible. Um, so yeah, I committed right away because the spirit and the characters in the story were so engaging and so
Yeah.
compelling, and so charming. And you don't come across a story like this, every day. Um, it was a very, very deceptively powerful story, and I wanted to make sure we got that to the screen intact.
So, first of all, can you just explain to us who Margie is, just for those who don't know? You said you ran to
Oh yeah,
Margie, I think,
yeah, Margie
at,
Cohn.
at DreamWorks.
Yeah, she's our studio head.
Thank you.
We're at DreamWorks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll cut out all the bit where you say all the bad things about her. Don't worry, that's fine.
I got no
It,
bad things.
it will come out absolutely fine. A lot of the interviews you've done about this film, and a lot of the material I've been sent has been rightly about the richness, the visual look, and the approach of it. Can I just ask about a bit I'm not seeing an awful lot of, which is you as the screenwriter adapting a piece of work, and presumably I mean I don't know how you write, I don't know what your process is for adaptation, and I don't know how much time into it at the start you build in for that. Can you just tell us the nerdy bit of adapting something it's cherished to people, really?
There's always a first time through before we
Yeah.
start booking. So I took a pass through the whole thing initially, and then once I turned in that initial script, I just continued to rewrite all the
Yeah.
way through until the very, very end. I am a creature of story. I came from the story
Yes.
department, and I will always be in the story department. So half of the time I'm writing, and the other half of the time I'm storyboarding and I'm drawing. Um, I think I communicate things best when I draw them.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the story, I mean, a lot of the story comes from the story department and from our normal process of iterations. Our story artists will jump into my pages and they will visualize them. We will put them on film and we will look at them and we'll put temporary voices together and music and we'll just watch them. And if they work, great. If they don't work, we will revise them. There's a lot more stuff on the cutting room floor than you
Yeah.
see on. We go through many iterations to find the right versions of all these story moments. And part of the process of screenwriting in an adaptation like this is pruning away enough things and the right things so that all the other stuff has room to breathe.
Yeah.
Animation and filmmaking is a very disciplined thing. You only have so much time, and an audience only has so much attention. So you've got to spend every moment as wisely as possible. And you also don't want to rush. One of the magic things about this film is keeping the right pace so that you
Yeah.
feel like you're lost on this island along with Roz.
One of the things that for me, the underrated DreamWorks film is the Captain Underpants movie. And it shares something in common with that runs right through your entire filmography, I think. In that, at the heart of your films, no matter what's going on, no matter how expensive they are, no matter how beautiful they look, there's a smallness at the heart of it that it's not everything's the end of the world or something like that. There's something really tight and small and that matters at the heart of it. And I just wonder, so for instance in Captain Underpants, if that one, the stakes are nothing. What I love about that is the stakes are nothing more than they might get put into different classes, and I just love how the story goes so small in the midst of all. How hard do you have to fight to keep your story contained in the midst of all these tools and wonderful stuff that's around you, the wonderful drawings that are around you?
You said the right thing, which is sometimes really small things and intimate things are the most compelling things.
Yeah.
I look for compelling. Compelling is what we strive for. And from the very beginning, Margie and Kristen and I, we all talked about this property. It's very different.
Yeah.
The Wild Robot is a very different kind of story than any that DreamWorks has ever done before. And all of its strengths lie in very fragile places. And so from the very beginning, all of us were in agreement that this was going to be a different kind of movie and that we would stay true to it. And I have to say to their credit, the studio's executives have always seen this book and those intimate character moments as our North Star.
Yeah.
Never wavered from that.
And then in terms of the visual look of it, that I don't think I'm going particularly talking out of school to say that for a little while, DreamWorks films, you could spot a DreamWorks film from early visuals some way out. I've loved an awful lot of DreamWorks films. I'm not punching down on them at all, but it was getting to the point where it looked like there was something of a house style. Here, I wouldn't have pegged where it was from at all. I couldn't have guessed the parent studio of it. What was, I don't know, take me into something like day 6 of the conversations of the look of it. Because day 1, you've decided, presumably, we're going to do something different here. But once you start getting into the weeds of that, how complicated is that? How hard is it to do?
I would love for you to eventually be able to interview Ramon and Jeff Budsberg, our visual supervisor and our production designer, and let them tell you the story of how they found the look of this film. But the look of the film was critical. I didn't want this film to be business as usual as far as a house CG style. All of us as studios were connected to a similar look because that's where technology was.
Of course, yeah.
That was the limit of technology. And with Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, and with Bad Guys, DreamWorks had already made some gigantic strides visually in finding a more handmade style that harkened to the things about animation that made us love it in the first place.
Yeah.
With Wild Robot, I challenged them to go further still. And we had a development artist named Daniel who was in France, and he was producing these incredible paintings that were very impressionistic, very relaxed, very unself-conscious. They were colorful and they were powerful. And I likened them to really the Tyrus Wong paintings that were the heart and soul of Bambi's style.
Yeah.
And I asked our engineers, Jeff and Ramon, can our finished film look identical to these development paintings, and they said, we'll do our best. And I remember the day where we were looking at some scenery, and I thought, oh my gosh, they've done it. They've
Yeah.
really done it. Like, and I had a moment of, I really questioned whether I should have challenged them to do this, because I did have a moment of terror thinking, have we gone too far? This is
Yeah.
one of the, I've never seen anything like this. It's groundbreaking. And I was actually worried that the style might somehow, I don't know, conflict with the story or something, just because it was so different.
Yeah.
And almost immediately when we fused our hand-painted animal characters into this world, it was quite the opposite. All my fears went away, and I was now just anxious to continue and make this film, and finish this film. Um, and I think it is groundbreaking visually.
Yeah.
Everyone, oddly enough, the story is about a robot that has to exceed its programming in order to survive. This movie is about hundreds of artists who came together, including Chris Bowers and Lupita Nyong'o, and everyone exceeded my wildest expectations as far as as far as the gifts that they were going to give us. Um, and I am humbled by what
Yeah.
everyone has done on this
I,
film.
I'm glad at the start of that as well, you name checked the visual style of the bad guys. I don't think it got anywhere near enough credit for that. That was a much bigger leap than I thought it looked. But also in terms of leaps that you've taken, I think one that's kind of underrated in your career is the leap you made with score in How to Train Your Dragon, because you mentioned Chris Bowers there.
Hmm.
And just I remember watching the first How to Train Your Dragon film and being absolutely thrilled and propelled by the union of the visuals to score in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. That animated films are powered by song for a lot, but to see it so effectively done with score felt like a bigger evolution than it got credit for at the time. In terms of this, you've got Chris Bowers writing I talk about writing first time for an animated film as if it's like still not talking to humans and stuff like that. And just, but even so, I just wonder why. I mean, how early do you bring someone into the process of music on your films? How important is that to you?
Music is the most important element, I think, storytelling wise, that I can possibly
Oh,
think of.
really? That high?
Absolutely. The example I would give, Dean and I were working on Lilo and Stitch, and there was
Yeah.
a moment with Alan Silvestri that changed my career's my movie making life.
Yeah.
Because at one point we were looking at the storyboards and the story reel, and Alan said, I totally get the story. I see what's going on. He said, but I missed the moment where Stitch changed from bad to good. And Dean and I both kind of, shuffled our feet and, and said, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, we couldn't really figure out how to write it. We tried, we couldn't really verbalize it, and so we had to admit we left it off screen." And Alan, he said, "We left it off screen because we didn't know how to say it." And Alan said, "Put it
Interesting.
on screen, and I'll say it." And that was a revelation. So there's a
Yeah.
moment where Stitch is doing literally nothing, but the music turns and you realize it happened.
Yeah.
So Dean and I made a pact, I think, maybe even out loud, that we would never again make a movie without building homes for music, if you will. Um, so in How to Train Your Dragon, that
Yeah.
moment was a forbidden friendship moment where the dragon, Toothless, and Hiccup have to work out their relationship and figure things out. And no one says a word.
Yeah.
And John Powell knew that he was going to be the voice of our characters at that moment. Um, and he was intimidated by that. He said it was the last piece of music he wrote for the film because he was so intimidated,
Interesting.
knowing that this was so important and it was this pivotal moment that he was going to be the voice. So music is the closest thing to magic that we really do have. So in The Wild Robot, we brought Chris Bowers on as early as we could. He came on very, very early, and he knew from the very beginning that he was going to be the voice of this movie. We have 50% of the dialogue that one of these films normally has. We
Yeah.
have great open expanses where music is our voice, and music does the storytelling, and music does the heaviest lifting story-wise. And I went further on this film than ever before. There were moments in this film where I asked Chris to disregard the the details of what he saw on screen. And I said, free yourself to just write a piece of music that begins and develops and finds its voice and its ending. And if we need to adjust things, we will. And so that's exactly what we did. He wrote pieces of music, not all the time. A lot of the times, most of the time he was guided by visuals, and he
Yeah.
and he and he it's an intricate dance that we do between our visuals and our music. But there were moments where we allowed him to just break free of that and to just write. And holy mackerel, did he write? Um, Holy mackerel! I get choked up when I think
But
about what he did.
I mean,
And,
if
and we
Christopher
we
not
let him, we let him take the lead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just to say, if Christopher Nolan says to Hans Zimmer, which apparently he does, go off and write and don't watch the film first, and then it doesn't quite match, Christopher Nolan can find like another 5 seconds or something on the cutting room floor or something. So if Chris like overwrites by an hour, I don't know, a minute or something like that, surely you've got a room of animators who are heading to his house with pitchforks and just trying to take him down.
I think the opposite. We our animators didn't want it to end. I remember that as every animator came to the end of their time,
Yeah,
every single one of us was like, "Can't we find one more thing for you to do?"
I love
As
that. I love
Yeah,
that.
oh my gosh, I didn't want it to end. I have to say,
Well,
I've never had so much fun working on a film.
I don't really want this conversation to end. I feel we're heading that way. So I do want to ask you this, that this isn't the gotcha question at the end, don't worry. But I'm curious how you direct a film like this 20 odd years after you've directed your first movie. Because I've read, for instance, that with this one, you mentioned Lupita Nyong'o before, that you would talk to her, you would talk the actors through the arc of their story at the start of a recording session. You would allow the actors to brainstorm and bring in nuances and extra things there. And you talked just before about how you and Dean directing Lilo and Stitch, you didn't know where to put a piece of music, for instance. And so the version of you now, is this a film that you had to have gone through the last 20 years of filmmaking to be in a position to make?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I'd never really thought about that, but it was there were so many things about The Wild Robot that were just the right things in the right place at the right
yeah,
time, that produced magic. And I would say that I was in the right place in my career to be able to take this on. But also, I think technologically, we were in the right place as a studio,
yeah,
um, poised to make this next giant leap right at the time where this movie came along that needed that leap. So yeah, this was a conjunction of a lot of magical things, really.
yeah. And so, I mean, if I can just tie things up by just taking you to the Kiskaloo stuff that you've done, I think that's how I pronounce it. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
And I mean, before you, because I follow what films you're trying to make. The Call of the Wild was the last film I watched before we all went into lockdown. I like that. I don't think you should have got the kicking you did. I had an enormous amount of fun with that. But I read at that point you were looking to develop a movie based on Kiskaloo. And I'm kind of curious if that's a thing, if that's something you'd take the Jim Capobianco route and like crowdfund if you couldn't get a studio behind it or something. Is it something like deep in your heart that you want to do?
I'd love to do that someday. Yeah, I still write it. I have trouble finding the time to draw it,
Yeah,
but yeah, I know exactly where that's going. And I think Kiskaloo represents um it's a safe place for me. It's like
I
that's
get
where I
that.
go in my head when I'm stressed. And where that story is headed is a particular place that I would love people to just live in when they're stressed. Like it's a particularly magical little world that I'm building for that.
And is it still your intent somewhere on the line to take it to a feature?
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. Either that or a series, but I'd love to. Yeah.
And I mean, just to round this up, this has been a real delight talking to you. Apart from the fact that, as mentioned, you've cost me an awful lot of money. Where I mean, where do you sit now? I mean, not in terms of physically and geographically, but where do you sit now, having completed something so ambitious? If the old Hitchcock thing is your next project as a reaction to the one you've just done, what's your reaction? What do you think you'll take forward?
That is a wonderful question. I don't think enough about what I want to do next. I think I
Yeah,
just focus on where I am. There are definitely more books in the series.
I
Um,
spotted
and,
that.
and I love these characters. So I think that one possible future for me would be to stay in this world for a bit longer.
Yeah.
Because the artists that we've gathered to make this, it's a family that I would love to keep together,
Yeah.
if possible. And part of that is Chris Bowers and Lupita and Pedro and Catherine and Bill and Kit. I mean, I've met so many amazing,
You look
kind.
so happy. I do lots of these interviews. It's a long time since I've seen someone beaming as they mention the list of names. You actually you're either a brilliant actor or you are legitimately happy, and maybe both.
No, I'm a crappy actor. That's why I do what I do.
Chris Sanders, this has been an absolute delight. Congratulations on your film, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful interview.
And that was Chris Sanders. Nice man. The film The Wild Robot is in UK cinemas from the 18th of October 2024. It's already been released in lots of places around the world, but you'll be able to see it in cinemas over here from the moment this podcast is being released, give or take. That also brings me to the end of this special episode of Film Stories. So a big thank you to listening, and thank you for your time. If I've not bored you completely, you can find more from me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Simon Brew. You can find more from the entire Film Stories project on both of those platforms at Film Stories. If you go to Facebook, we're at facebook.com/filmstoriesonline, youtube.com /film stories. Our website is filmstories.co.uk, a clickbait free entertainment website. Imagine such things. And if you go to store.filmstories.co.uk, that's where you can buy our print magazines and things like that. Also, if you really like this podcast, God bless you, please do think about leaving a really positive review and subscribing to it as well. And if you're really, really, really a fan of this podcast, if you head to patreon.com/SimonBrew, put some money in the pot there. You get it early, you get it ad-free, you help me make it, and you find out the gossip of what's going on behind the scenes. I think that's enough for now, though. I'm off to watch more films. I'm going to get ready for your regular episode of Film Stories. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. The most important thing, as always, is you all stay safe and well. I'll catch you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.